Justice. I'm here to give you an update on the National Commission on Forensic Science, let you know what's been going on. I think the most important thing that I'm going to do here today is I'm going to jump all the way down to bullet 4, which is really to stress the importance of your involvement in this process. So although we have 40 members on the National Commission of Forensic Sciences, what's really important, though, is the input that we get from the community as a whole. There's many opportunities for you to comment on documents, for you to comment otherwise. At every single meeting we have, we allow people to come in and to publicly address the commission, and we listen. So that's kind of the most important thing. So that's the one thing that I want you to take away from this summary today. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what's been going on over the past 1.5 years. I've got a little bit of some updates on some of the work that we've been reviewing, and then looking at some of the current work products that are starting to move through. In terms of the timeline for the commission activities, there was an announcement in 2013 at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences annual meeting that there was a charter that was filed and that DOJ and NIST would be entering into this agreement. The commission membership was named, and so as of now, we've had 6 meetings. Our last meeting was right at the end of April, beginning of May. Our next meeting is in August. So please, keep that in mind as I talk through this a little bit more, but there'll be an opportunity for you to either attend that meeting. We do webcast them, so you don't have to be physically present in Washington, D.C. And then I guess I'm proud to say that the DOJ just, with respect to a federal advisory committee, these are usually on a 2-year renewable cycle, and so DOJ renewed that commission charter on April 23rd, 2015. So we'll definitely be here for another 2 years. More recently, we have Sally Yates, who is the Deputy Attorney General. She was just sworn in and more recently, and she's now the DOJ co-chair. And then Willie May from NIST is the other co-chair. Nelson Santos and John Butler represent DOJ and NIST respectively. They're the vice chairs. In fact, one of them was, I think, scheduled to come here today originally to do this discussion, but they could not make it. So if you're not familiar with the commission itself, there's 40 members that are, 8 of them are ex officio members. The members are very broad, or the diversity of the members includes scientists, forensic scientists, practitioners, defense attorneys, judges, prosecutors. We have a law enforcement representation. So the panel is extremely diverse. I think in the beginning of the commission, we were sort of trying to find our way through. I would say and these are I'll say my personal feelings, is that we struggled in the first few meetings to sort of get some traction. But I think what has happened, and I feel very confident in saying this, is that all of the commissioners have just sort of are starting to gel together. I think at some point we all realize that we're in this for the same thing, that we all want the same thing. We want the best science to be done. We want to be able to depend on that science, and we want to understand the limitations of that science. We also have subcommittees, or we created subcommittees. There's the accreditation and proficiency testing, human factors, interim solutions, MDI, reporting and testimony, scientific inquiry and research, and then training on science and law. So those 7 subcommittees have been formed over the course of the past 1.5 years. We've also invited non-commissioners to participate in those subcommittees. We have 58 non-commissioners that participate in that process, or at least contribute to that process. I personally, I'm on the reporting and testimony subcommittee, and I'm on the scientific inquiry and research committee. In both, as you'll see, there's a lot of work products that are starting to generate from all of these committees. In terms of how the commission works, it is a federal advisory committee, and therefore the recommendations in terms of the direct authority, the recommendations are made to the Attorney General. And there's 3 work product types, and we end up getting a lot of questions about what these work products, at least the way we've divided it, what this means. But there's a there are views documents, directives documents, and policy documents. So views documents are essentially it's a view to the Attorney General of all of the National Commission. So if we have a particular topic that we're addressing and we want to express our strong view on that, then we would put together a document, and then the Attorney General then has gets to see, I guess, what that view is. A directive is we're asking the Attorney General to do something. And then a policy document is more broader, I'll say kind of from the 30,000-foot view. The work product, so very important, want to emphasize this, that if you go, you can see all of the work products. They're all available on the internet. You probably should sign up for email alerts. I think there's actually many different email updates that you can sign up for. One of them would be whenever a new product comes out, then you would get an automated email telling you that that new product has been publicized. Also, in terms of the meeting page, once again, sign up for that email. So every time a meeting is going to occur, then you'll get that email as well too. And then in terms of updates on everything, we have, it's called Gov Delivery. Well, go to this, sign up for it, and then you'll be updated on everything and anything that takes place with the commission. So the one thing I started off in the beginning was, what I talked about was how we need public comments. So we have 40 people at the table, if you will, but public comments are so very important. And anybody that wishes to comment on anything with respect to the commission, use regulations.gov. So whenever a work product comes out, you have the opportunity to comment on that work product. For those of you that are not familiar with the standards development process, it's kind of a very similar process where you have a document that's posted to the public, and the public now has an opportunity to comment on that document. When you comment on that document, we're obligated to address your comment. So whether that be in a subcommittee or whether that be at the National Commission meetings, we would do that. But once you comment, then we're obligated to read that, review it, and address it somehow. In the first round of documents that went out for public comment, we received 138 comments. And then 41, we ended up extending that period. We had some issues in terms of getting out the comments in a timely manner, I'll say, before the meeting. So we extended the comment period for another 10 days. And we received a total of about 179 comments. So that's a lot of comments from people. And we've been reviewing all of those comments. That's our job as being commissioners, or if you're part of the subcommittee, when you get the comments, then you have to review those. I can tell you, I personally reviewed all of the comments that we received for reporting and testimony, and for the scientific literature reviews. In meeting number 5, which was in January, this is really when we started to gain traction in terms of documents moving through. There was a policy recommendation for universal accreditation. There was also another policy recommendation for accreditation of medical examiner and coroner offices, certification of medical legal death investigators. There was a directive, and basically certification of medical legal death investigators is, to me, this is, I guess for lack of a better term, it's kind of a no-brainer. You have people that are making a determination on the cause and manner of death. And I would say that those people should be trained and should have some sort of certification if they're doing something like that. And currently there is no mandatory requirement to have that done. Also, we posted a document on scientific literature in support of forensic science in practice, and it was a views document. Essentially what that document was we were saying is, and I think this is really important to understand, is that when a forensic scientist relies on previous research, that research must go through a peer-reviewed scientific process. So if somebody does a presentation at a meeting on a specific topic, and a forensic scientist is citing that presentation in a Daubert hearing, that's probably not the right thing to do, because that presentation has not gone through a rigorous scientific review process. So if you're going to address a challenge in court, then you should have rigorous science behind you to do that. Once again, almost seems like a no-brainer, but that's something that I think, as the commission, as these documents come through, they're starting to resonate a little bit more. In fact, the scientific literature document has been cited at least in a couple of places. One at an international conference over in Europe. This was reviewed. This document was referred to, and then it was brought up in another venue as well too. So you can see, generally speaking, those number 2, 3, and 4 obviously had a strong majority there. Number 1, there was it had to go back to committee for some minor revisions. In terms of meeting 6 now, so through that 30-day public review, the revisions were made. We had a document on inconsistent terminology, one on universal accreditation once again, and then one on definitions of forensic science and related terms. So for those of you that have been paying attention to the meetings or been attending the meetings, we've been using terms like forensic science service provider to provide a definition for a laboratory or to an entity that provides a forensic science service where they issue a report and potentially testify in court. We needed to come up with sort of a definition that we could use, that everybody understood what a forensic science service provider was, and there were some other definitions in there as well too. So that all of those documents were favorably addressed. In the universal accreditation, after making the minor revisions, is now approved. Basically the view of the commission is that by 2020, that every laboratory in the United States or every forensic science service provider should be accredited. And once again, this is something, it's funny because my history in forensic science goes back all the way to about 1992. And in 1992, we were talking about the same thing back then, is that how accreditation was very important and that it should happen soon. Here we are in 2016. I think by all accounts, most major forensic science laboratories in this country, and Matthew can correct me, but well over 90% of them, when people think about a forensic science laboratory, well over 90% of them are accredited right now. There are police departments that do latent print analysis or some firearms examinations, fire scenes, and that sort of thing. Not all of those are accredited, but I guess what most people would think of as forensic science laboratories, in terms of state laboratories, federal laboratories, the far majority of those are already accredited. We're still waiting a notice of the Attorney General on acceptance of the approved documents. So that's going through a process right now. Going back to meeting 5, we did receive a number of public comments on our documents. As you can see, we received 108 comments. So we are getting a lot of feedback on the documents, and we're encouraging more. The one thing I would recommend is that if you're going to provide feedback, have it be constructive. So I've seen some comments as, this document doesn't make sense, or that's not a good idea. So, provide a persuasive argument to why you believe something, and offer a suggestion. That's really one of the most important things. There's nothing worse than somebody saying, that's a terrible sentence, or that doesn't make any sense, but there's no suggestion to follow. So offer a suggestion. I think it's a great idea to do that at the end. In terms of status reports, there's a report writing. We have a number of action items that are taking place right now on report writing, probabilistic statements, evidence preservation and retention, proficiency testing, steps to accreditation, transparency of quality records, National Judicial Education Program, and then institutional best practices on human factors. I would say this last one, the human factors cognitive bias thing, I think if you went back into the forensic community, if we sort of went into rewind mode and we went back 6, 7, 8 years, and we started to see the first papers about cognitive bias, I would say generally speaking, most forensic scientists they said, no, there's no cognitive bias. That doesn't happen to me. I think we're at a point now where we've kind of hit that, we've made it through that paradigm shift, and I would speak for most forensic scientists in saying, yeah, cognitive bias is a real thing. This can happen to us. Now what we want in the forensic science community is, now we want to figure out how to address this, and I think that's our next challenge. So I don't think there needs to be any more convincing that cognitive bias can be a potential issue with respect to interpretation of evidence and rendering reports and testifying. We're at that point now, though. Now we want to figure out, how do we mitigate it? How do we train for it? How do we educate all of our forensic scientists that have been in the field for many, many years, and now this kind of a newer concept to them? So now that's sort of the next challenge. You don't have to convince us that it's a real issue anymore. In terms of the documents that have been adopted by the Commission, we did have a document where we wanted to survey law enforcement forensic units to understand to the extent of the services, forensic services that they were providing. So of the 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, how many of those, or what percentage of those are a forensic science service provider? How many of those issue reports with respect to latent print examinations, firearm examinations, arson or fire scenes? We wanted to understand that, so we're working on developing a survey for that. Accreditation of the medical examiner and coroner offices, that once again, that's something that's been moving through very quickly, and it's starting to pick up some traction. Inconsistent terminology was a document that I worked on personally with a group. I thought this document was good. I was a forensic scientist for many years. I've testified, I don't know, close to 100 times. I go back many years, and I've used the term consistent with. I've used the term match. I'd always try to work to make the person that, or make the court, or whoever I was expressing that opinion to, I wanted them to understand that. One thing I tell people all the time, and I advise attorneys on this, is if somebody doesn't say the word the same, there's a reason for that. Now, I'm a chemist, okay? I even stay away from saying the two items are blue or the same color. Okay, one might be navy blue and one might be a little different blue. But unless I make a chemical measurement, a physical measurement, to be able to say those colors are the same, then I can't say they're the same. So that's the reason that we kind of backed into terminology consistent with and so forth. It should just be a flag right off the bat. I would be hesitant if somebody's using the word the same in the report. That's another red flag as well too. I mean, if somebody says something's the same, that means, from my standpoint, being a chemist, that means in all physical and chemical aspects are these two items the same. There's no way to differentiate them. So, that inconsistent terminology, it gets misinterpreted sometimes, but I don't believe that most forensic scientists are trying to create some sort of shadow behind all of this and hide behind that. It's because we struggle on how to express our opinions without, I think in most cases we're trying to be overly accurate, or we're trying to be as accurate as possible, and so we're struggling with those words. I'm going to give a presentation later on in the afternoon to sort of nail this down a little bit more and kind of provide some examples of how you can sort of get caught into terminology and how it gets difficult to express that. And then expressing that in writing is much more difficult than expressing that when you're discussing it to a jury. It's really easy to say to a jury, well, you know, I did these tests, and I can't say exactly that they're the same, but I did all these physical and chemical measurements, and I just couldn't differentiate them. However, that doesn't mean they're the same. And that gets easier to express verbally than it does sometimes in a report. And then sometimes when we issue reports, so we issue reports to our investigators oftentimes, and then the investigators read the word, and then before you know it, they're briefing the attorney on that, and it all sort of changes around. It's a game of telephone tag that sort of happens as things start moving through the process. In terms of an overall summary, we've had 1 document endorsed by the Attorney General, 6 documents have been adopted by the Commission, 7 documents in draft stage and public comments period ended May 15th, so we'll be addressing those over the next few months, and then 8 are in various phases of development. So a lot of documents that are going through. It's starting to get really busy, and I know this probably takes a good 20% of my time now. And in fact, I don't even have the time to work on this at work. That's actually encroaching into my personal time now because of all the work products that are coming out. But it's exciting. In terms of some recent changes, we have Andrew Bruck. He is now what we call the designated federal official, or the DFO, for the National Commission on Forensic Science. He's replacing Brett Steele. Andrew came over from New Jersey, and I believe he was an assistant U.S. attorney there, and he's been in place for about 3 or 4 months now. We have a new bylaws subcommittee. The purpose of the bylaws subcommittee was to define and refine the process by which our documents are presented and how we talk about them and how we vote on them and so forth, and to talk about it and to sort of create, if you will, some rules around how we address things at the National Commission meetings. Vice chairs, like I said, I had mentioned earlier, Nelson and John are still in place. We now have an OSTP, Office of Science and Technology Policy representative, and that's Tanya Simoncelli. And then the commission representatives, we have a researcher, a forensic science laboratory practitioner, a defense attorney, and a prosecuting attorney working on that bylaws committee as well too. So that seems to be a pretty diverse committee. As well, there was a Federal Register notice for new members, and that recently closed on May 28th. We now have we're seeking digital evidence representation because now that digital evidence has gotten pulled into the National Commission as well. It was not something that was inclusive in the original charter, but it is now included in that. And then there are some outgoing commissioners that had to be replaced as well. So in summary, we've had 6 commission meetings up to this point. Everything is available on the National Commission website. We have 7 subcommittees that are currently operating, include input from 58 non-commissioners as well. 14 total documents will have been presented for public comment as of May 1st. And then the commission has been rechartered for the next 2 years. So we'll be around, and hopefully we can give an update next year. In terms of all the meeting materials, I believe that everybody's got a copy of this presentation, or if you do, there's a lot of links here. And then at the end, and then the other thing, the most important thing is if you have questions, my email's not up there, so you can contact either Nelson Santos or John Butler. So that's the best part of this presentation. We can certainly talk in the room, but if you want to email them, feel free, and I'll keep that up there just a little longer to make sure you get that email down. And then also what I did at the end of the presentation, because I knew I didn't have enough time, was I've got a summary of all the meeting topics that go through here, and that's all for your reference material, but for now, that's where the presentation ends. Thank you very much.